Their brief bios are in your program. If you look on pages 14 and 15, you'll see them under the caption, Rotary Leaders, Special Guests, and Speakers. It really should probably be titled, Extraordinarily Outstanding Rotary Leaders, Special Guests, and Speakers.
Yeah, that's all we need. Yeah. Oh.
As you read their bios, please realize that this is only a brief list, just a snapshot of all the things they've done in the way of service and in their careers. Service above self is our Rotary motto. Most of us struggle each day to overcome the strong and the very excessive demands of self. Self is a tough taskmaster. It's always telling you that your desires and wants are the most important thing. But what we find as we give of ourselves, as the desires and demands of self become less and less important, is that we become more important, not as a matter of stature, but as a consequence of the lives that we change, the lives that we save, the lives that we make better through our service. Bill and John are great examples of persons who put service ahead of self, who have very little self. They've morphed into just where their self is now service. They have given much of their lives, their talents, and their fortunes in service to Rotary, in doing good around the world, in giving hope where there is none. They have truly engaged Rotary and changed lives. Please join me, stand, and let's welcome John and Bill to the podium.
I'll go for you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Thank you. There'll be some of you in the room who are old enough to remember the movies, you got a double feature. Well, that's what you've ended up with. After fighting for it, I'm going to go first. And I want to spend the next few minutes reflecting on Rotary into the future. I think I probably need to make a disclaimer there. I'm no futurologist. If you want to know the winning numbers for the lotto tonight, I wouldn't have a clue. And in general, Lorna thinks you should never stand behind me in the line at the supermarket because you can guarantee it'll be the slowest. But having said that, I think we can see Rotary into the future and where we are going. And I think it's going to be a great future. If I'm going to make personal comments, I should also make one on the fact that I don't generally speak with notes, but I want to read a couple of things. And just before Christmas, I had cataract operation. Now, for those of you who've been through that, you'll know the sort of thing that now happens. If any of you right around the outside go to sleep, I'll see you, but I'll miss all the ones in the front. But the Rotary magazine for Britain is called Rotary Today, and they've been running a series of interviews with young Rotarians. And one of those young Rotarians, and maybe his age gives you some clue as to what they consider as young, was a 46-year-old called Jerry McElvogue, who was president of his Rotary Club. And the question that was asked of him was, what lies ahead for Rotary? And this is what he said. Rotary has to change and adapt to the modern world. We need to deal with the perception that it's for men of a certain age, and attracting younger members is key to it. We lack media impact. We're not in the public eye enough. We need to change at the grassroots level and need to ask ourselves hard questions. Why would someone give up their time to sit with ageing men and have dinner with them? It's absolutely essential to have fun, build friendships, socialise, and have idea sharing, and also to get clubs together to talk. Well, I think we've got a message for Jerry. I think the message is that we're not stuck in the past. I think the qualities of Rotary are still those that have always been there. And this morning in the workshop of the round table that we sat in, they were talking about the qualities of Rotary. They're unchanging. But we are changing our Rotary, and we're changing it for the better. Probably the standout new model Rotary Club is the Rotary Club of Crawley in West Australia. They were chartered in 2010. They've got 122 members and they're growing. 30% of their members are under the age of 30 and 51% of their members are women. And they've found that they've got a real ability within that club to run major fundraising events. And in their 3 years, they've raised $850,000, some of which has gone to polio, some to local Rotary activities, and some within their community. When Lorna and I went to Japan in 2007, we went to an alumni club. This was formed of basically foundation alumni, though there was some youth exchange people within it. Average age, my guess, would be 40, and a fair mix of men and women. Now, Rotary in Japan is having a tough time. Back in 2006, I think they were almost 110,000 members, and they're now down to 88,000 members. But the alumni club that we visited was everything that so many Rotary clubs, other Rotary clubs we visited, weren't. They don't have a meal. The night we went, we got a glass of wine and nibbles because it was a special occasion. Some of you will be pleased to know that they sing. There's a lot of enthusiasm in the meeting, but what's important was that they were so proud of the projects that they were undertaking. And the projects are excellent. And there are now 4 of those alumni clubs in Japan. Now, they're not going to turn around the drop in membership, not in the short term, but they're going to make sure that Rotary doesn't fade away in Japan, because they are the model of a Rotary club that will take Japan into the future. And we're seeing changes. Shortly before Christmas, I spoke at a Rotary club in just outside of Auckland called Pukekohe. It's a sort of rural town, I guess you could call it, maybe 15,000 people. Very old Rotary club. And they decided that what Pukekohe needed was a Rotaract club. So they got some names together and they invited a group of potential Rotaractors to come to a meeting. The Rotarians described what Rotaract is. And now we're going along fairly well when one of the young people there said, "Can I ask a question?" And I said, "Certainly." The question was, why can't we be a Rotary club? And the club stopped and thought about it and couldn't think of a reason why not. So the rest of that evening was spent in talking about what would they be like as a Rotary club. And again, they're not going to eat, so they won't have grace. For the rest of you, you'll be pleased to know they're not going to have singing. And they decided on something which I don't think is going to last. They thought that they will change their meeting place every week. But because they're all texting and tweeting each other, everybody will know where they are. The only problem is no visitors ever will. I don't think it's going to really work out that way. The club will certainly be chartered in this Rotary year. And the other news club that I was going to comment on, the story comes from an email that Ron Burton, our President-elect, received. And it relates to District 5750 and their newest Rotary Club. Well, it was when the email came through. And it came from who was the immediate past governor. He said that he and Michelle Schaefer, who was their DGN, had decided that they would see if they could use social media to set up a new Rotary Club. So on 30th of March last year, they went to a venue that they thought was potentially a site for the club, and the owner said he thought that would be a great idea. March 30. April 5, they met with Rotarian Hal Stevens. Now, Hal is a real new media man who got very enthusiastic. And they asked him if he'd help. And he said, yeah, fine. 2 days later, on April the 7th, the first LinkedIn posting on discussion groups was made, Facebook page was set up, the names were established. On April the 11th, the Facebook announcement and invitation went out. On April the 16th, they had their first meeting. They got 18 commitments to join Rotary at that first meeting. On April 23rd, they had their second meeting. And so that took them to 25 written commitments. The club actually chartered on the 15th of May. March 30, discussing a venue. May 15, chartering a club. But what really interested me in this was that the typical ages run early 40s to early 50s, a couple of mid-30s and one over 60. And doesn't that change your stereotype of social media and who's using it? But those are just a few examples of new styles of Rotary Club, of taking a wonderful Rotary and finding different ways to express it. And if I was talking to Jerry, I think I'd tell him about those. I'd also tell him something else, and I won't go too long into this. Perhaps John in your time can make a somewhat similar comment about Bill Gates. But we get very insular when we look at our Rotary clubs. We measure Rotary on our own club and sometimes on our neighbours and the district. But we don't get that picture of where Rotary stands in the wider world. In January, I went to a meeting in Washington, DC. And somebody organised for me to meet after the meeting that we were in had concluded for the day in a bar with a gentleman called Chris Holmes, who is water administrator for USAID, which of course is the way that they funnel all your money overseas. And we talked about water and sanitation. I should tell you, just to make sure that there's no corruption involved here, I had a beer, he had ginger ale, but he insisted he paid for his own. He'd obviously read the book. We talked about all sorts of things, and then eventually he said, you know, Rotary could help us. And I said, in what way? He said, well, we've got good friendly relationships with DFID, which is the British government's agency, very good relations with the Dutch and German aid agencies, but we can't get them to combine and come together so that we can take on a big project. And we talked what a big project might be. And he said, I think it would be possible if we really all brought in our resources, that we could take a country, say in Africa, and do something that would be a flagship project. that we maybe something like toilets in every school. And it would cost a fair amount of money. But if the government aid agencies combined, and you talk to somebody like the Gates Foundation, which has a special budget for water and sanitation, and Coca-Cola is very active in Africa, and maybe incorporate somebody like UNICEF. He said, I think it would be possible to put together a coalition which would really be able to do a major project, and we could then say to the world, look what you can do. And I said, that sounds tremendous, and I hope you could pull it off. He said, no. He said, you misunderstand me, Bill. We can't pull it off, but Rotary could. If Rotary would set up a partnership like this, then you are capable of leading us through to a flagship project. Now, as I said, we see our Rotary in terms of our local community and our local club and what it is that we're doing. Here is an important person in the world of aid saying, we can't do it, but Rotary could. And John, you might like to mention Bill Gates' attitude in the same way. So I think we're seeing a Rotary where our standing in the world, mainly because of polio and our success in polio, has elevated Rotary to a level where we can talk to governments, and governments want to talk to us. And don't ever underestimate the power of Rotary, because we are a world force. And the third thing that I'd want to talk to Jerry about really relates to something and a question that was last night of Ken Choppett, and Ken very graciously didn't decide to answer it. But the question was on the Segal and Gale are doing something about branding for Rotary. What's it all about? And I'd just like to really reflect on what is happening in an exercise that we've stopped calling branding. The committee met for the last time this week. From now on, we're talking about strengthening Rotary. It all began because the board decided we were spending a lot of money on PR, and yet we were getting no visible results. Our membership wasn't growing. We weren't getting a whole long line of donors standing at our door, beating it down, saying, please take our money and do good things with it. So they decided that they would bring in a branding consultant, which was Segal and Gale. Segal and Gale started with what I think is probably the best survey that's ever been done of Rotary. It was a wonderful survey because they did a lot of face-to-face interviews. They attended several Rotary Club meetings. They went to a district conference. They went to an institute. They really got a feel for Rotary. And then they came back and told us what they had found. On the sort of downward side, the sort of things they said to us were, do you realise that Rotarians speak their own language? They said, as we travelled around, we were told about PDGs and PETs and Muna and Ryla, and every Rotarian knows exactly what they were talking about. But to a non-Rotarian, you just don't communicate when you use all those acronyms. And you really do have your own language. And they said that interestingly, the written language that you use is different again. Because if you look at your publications, they're very stilted and formal and quite pedantic. And they said, when we asked Rotarians, now just tell us what is Rotary, it took a long, long time and went along a whole lot of tracks because nobody had a quick, snappy answer to what Rotary is. And so they said, when we went into Evanston, we had a look and we found at least 12 mission statements. And if you're going to be that complicated, how do you expect Rotarians to be able to describe Rotary? And they said, logos, wow, you're not short of logos. They identified about 130 logos. And the interesting thing about them, because they put them all on the board, is that very few of them actually say Rotary. So we've got all those logos, all those subgroups within Rotary, and we're not even identifying that they're Rotary. I've got a personal thing about that. My personal thing, if you like, is Interact and Rotaract. And it was confirmed yesterday, actually, when I was talking to a lady whose club sponsors an Interact club, and they said once a year they have a combined club meeting with their Rotary Club and Interact. And every year the Interactors are amazed to know what Rotary is, or even that there is a Rotary. When you have a look at the Interact logo, it says nothing about Rotary. And when you look at the Rotaract logo, it's got an R on it, but it says nothing about Rotary. But they are important members of the family of Rotary. And I think over a period of time we should be looking that it's a logical progression. If you're an Interactor, when you leave Interact, you go looking for the nearest Rotaract club because you want to be a Rotaractor. And when you finish Rotaract, then you want to become a Rotarian. It should be a logical progression. Maybe you're going to need to find one of those new clubs that won't cost you the earth because they don't have meals at their meetings. And maybe they're going to meet at cocktail time because that will reduce the time of their meeting. All of those things will be answered, but we need that track of Interact to Rotaract to Rotary. And yet Interact and Rotaract have logos that don't even say they are part of Rotary. And we have missed out. We haven't really picked these things up. They said that they were interested to have a look at the publicity material that comes out of Evanston and how good it is. And that if you watch it, you get inspired, particularly if you're a Rotarian. But they said, do you realise that it's all built around international service? Now they said, what we found when we talked to Rotarians wasn't very long in every discussion when the word leader or leadership would come up. But where do you say it? All you do is talk about international service. And they said, you've got to realise that the gap between what Rotarians think they're telling the community and what the community is hearing is huge. And then they started to tell us some of the things that are important about Rotary. They said, we've found that you connect extremely well. You connect within your Rotary clubs. You connect club to club. And your ability to connect is something that's very special. They said that you're responsible leaders, both socially and ethically. And I think that's got a nice ring to it. I'm pleased to believe to an organisation that's made up of responsible leaders, socially and ethically. They said that we understand that you don't talk about the classification system as much as you used to. But they said the diversity that comes from that sort of approach is a huge strength of Rotary. To bring together leaders and business and professions in the community gives you a real strength. And that adds on the diversity that you've got because you truly are an international organisation. You've got many races and religions and cultures involved in the greater Rotary. They said we found that the two main reasons that people join Rotary are to make an impact on their community and for the friendships that they believe will follow. And when you look at the retention rate that we get in our membership, I just wonder if we truly are answering the response of those people who have joined us because they want to make an impact on their community and because they want to make new friends. Because interestingly enough, Rotarians of 3 to 5 years in Rotary said that those two factors were exactly why they had stayed in Rotary. Maybe the answer to some of our problems is in our own hands. But they said, what Rotary offers is what the world is asking for. And they said it's not just a matter of words. It's a matter of getting some focus into what we are, recognising what we're good at, and then doing something about it. It should be part of your thinking process, of your decision-making process. And then it spills over from there in how you communicate with other people. They said that the gold standard for an organisation like yours is to have clarity of purpose, accountability, and proven performance. And they said you've certainly got the last two in that. Add in the focus, and you're answering all the measurements of what an organisation that really is impactful can do. And they said we tried, as a branding company, we tried to look at the difference between you and everybody else to find why is Rotary different. And they said we looked at other service organisations and we appreciated what they do, but Rotary has other elements in Rotary that make it special. So they said, we then looked to see if you're a humanitarian organisation. Now there are about 2 million of those around the world, but they said, no, you're much more than a humanitarian organisation. And they said, you are in a category of one. Now, when they presented that to the Rotary Committee, we immediately sort of said, whoa, now, that's a very sweeping statement. And it's not one that we'd like to repeat unless we thought it was true. And they said, oh, we can prove it to you. We'll give you 4 good reasons to tell you why you are a category of one. So they said the first thing is that you think differently. And the reason you think differently is because you bring together all these people in different professions and businesses and within the community, so that when you address a challenge or an issue or an opportunity, you bring all these different views in. So you really work things out. You think differently to other organisations. And then they said, you act differently. And the reason you act differently is something that's almost instinctive. Because you're leaders, then you have all the qualities of leaders. And if you're designing a Rotary project, then you bring all those skills to bear. And you do it without even thinking about it. So you think differently, you act differently. The third reason is that you've got passion and perseverance. Now they said, we don't need to talk to you about passion. You talk to any Rotarian for a few minutes and the passion just shines through. And perseverance, well, we only really need to say one word, polio. Because you started in 1985, you're not quite finished yet, but you're going to be there to the end. And that is perseverance. And the fourth reason they gave, I found quite interesting because it gave me a new slant on something that I've thought about in Rotary for years. And they said, you talk a lot about international service, but remember that people join Rotary to make an impact on their community and for friendship. And they said that really the description of what you do in Rotary is that you do community service in over 34,000 places around the world. And what truly you are doing is community service on a global scale. And they said, put those together and you're in a category of one. And I believe the things that they have told us are true. I believe they have given us a focus which will take us into the future. And we will be a much stronger Rotary when we recognise our strengths and our qualities. So I would talk to Jerry, if I ever meet him, about the new styles of Rotary clubs and how we're not mired in the past. I'd talk to him about the standing that Rotary has in the world, in important places. And I'd talk to him about the qualities that Siegel and Gale found by looking at us in ways that we would never have looked at ourselves. And the relevance of that, of course, is that for you here in this room, most of you, next year will be presidents of your clubs. That Rotary has really no other hands than yours. That what Rotary will achieve next year is going to be the total, the sum of all the contributions of those 34,400 Rotary clubs around the world, each of them, like you, wanting to make an impact on their community. And it may sound a very significant responsibility, and it is, but it has a wonderful fun element which you're going to find out probably on the first day that you stand in front of your Rotary Club as president. But there's one thing that I ask of you, and that is get excited about the future of Rotary. Because if we've been great in the past, we're going to be even better in the future. Thank you.